a recognition that Europe has not done enough in defense and is going to do and is doing more now. We can talk a little bit about the 800 billion commitment that's come out. Basically, let's work together, standing together. That's a moment of reckoning. So, very strong statement. It's no secret to anyone in this audience, least of all to you, that these have not been easy weeks in the transatlantic relationship. Challenging few months. The latest tariff threat from the Trump administration came yesterday, that if we couldn't move faster in the direction of agreement by June 1st, it could go up to 50% for European products. I've just come back to from Brussels myself, and you see the European Union moving forward in defense faster and more decisively than ever in my lifetime. Also, some impact there of President Trump as well. So how do you see the impact of the Trump administration thus far on the European Union?
Well, I start from your latter part of your question, in that I think the realization that we had not done enough, that sort of very blunt wake-up call came on the 24th of February 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine, where we woke up to a realization that some of our countries were 100% reliant on Russian gas, where we were not in any way equipped with the agility that we needed to move equipment from one country to another, where we had essentially relied also on the United States to defend or solve our problems because we had been benefiting from the so-called peace dividend for decades. And that realization essentially made us, first of all, work together, that we have a tendency in Europe to talk about the Union, but then very easily reintroduce national borders when we think, that this is going to help us and not our neighbors. We realized that we can't do that. We diversified completely our energy mix. We understood that we need partners that are reliable and not imperialistic invaders that are in our neighborhood. And we also, over the last few months, understood that if we don't step up in terms of expenditure on security, and we have different discussions as to what security means. You have countries that says we need more investment in infrastructure, we need more investment in equipment, in procurement, making it easier for equipment to move across borders, etc. And that is where the rearm program, the 800 billion, which will make it easier for countries to be able to spend and also borrow without impacting your national deficit or the debt brake, is something that we are moving extremely quickly on, perhaps also because we've realized either we have no choice or that now's the time. So with regards to the last few weeks and what next week will bring, I've just come from a meeting with an Ohio senator, so a senator representing the state, in a car showroom of European cars. And we had a good discussion. And we looked around. These are European brands, made in the US, some of them in this state or neighboring states, with a realization that our markets are so integrated that we should try everything to avoid what could happen next week. How do we do that? I have always believed in de-escalation. I am a strong believer, and I'm sure that this is shared by many here, is that a tariff war benefits nobody, and that if we're going to enter a protectionist road to the bottom race, then the biggest losers will be the European and American consumers. Why do I refer to European and American consumers? It's because we are the most integrated market, have always been. Europe is a very open market, one where growth is projected to go quite fast, and that for American companies that invest in Europe, that growth could be much, much faster if the trade relationship is smooth. Now, where do we go from here? We would encourage as much dialogue and talks to happen over the next few days. We realize that there needs to be concessions. I think we should also be pragmatic. We should be honest as to where maybe there is an imbalance in goods, as to where there is a different type of balance in services, and go head to head in a way with saying how can we avoid what essentially has been avoided with countries neighboring the United States on this side of the Atlantic. We can learn from that, of how it happened, different ways. But what I think we should not allow, I would say, is that we find ourselves in a situation where our consumers will no longer look to the United States to purchase products that they have been purchasing. I think that is something that we have invested in for decades, and the reality is, from a price perspective, they could look elsewhere. And that's not and we would like to continue to invest here and be invested in from here.
It's an excellent answer. Thank you so much for that. How do these two issues relate to each other, the defense issue and the economic relationship issue? And does one have an impact on the other?
Well, I think without security we have nothing.
Right.
So we start with that. That we are in a situation where we have so many conflicts around the world that if you look at how fragile democracy is, and that you can have proper legislative terms where you identify ways of progress for the people you represent properly, there are very few places in the world that you can do it smoothly. And, our counterparts are Congress and the Senate. We find ourselves legislating on the same things very often. You would find a lot of alignment on how we deal with autocracies. We also have similar concerns. We share concerns, whether it is on Iran, for example, on Venezuela. I'm giving just two examples. But I would say that if you look at who is most aligned in ensuring that we are cyber resilient, who is behind massive interference in our electoral process, externally, sometimes also internally. 3, who would like to destabilize, then the continents with the strongest and most aligned interests are Europe and North America. And I say that because once you take that as a given, and we have huge exchange of information. I mean, I come from a legislative background in security and migration and defense, and we sort of have been working for years in exchange of information across the Atlantic. We rely on each other individually as member states, but also as a union. But that should be the basis of everything we do. If we build trust with that and we integrate a degree of honesty and frankness, which I very much believe in, and also pragmatism, we tend to, in Europe, preach a lot, and we should recognize that ourselves. That I travel a lot to many countries where that's one of the reactions that I get. Look, like you sort of tell us what to do, and then you do the opposite, or you allow the countries that are in the European Union already to do what they want, and then for a country to join. Our Western Balkan friends tell us this a lot. And we will hear this in the next few days, and then you make us go through hoop after hoop after hoop, and then tell us actually no, not yet, and wait a little bit, etc. So we also need to be self-critical and be open and welcome the fact that we get criticized. But we also need to be prepared and say, look, yes, we can do this, we can do better, but also so could you.
Thank you very much for that answer. European security in Ukraine. I thought your comments on that were very good, very clear, very strong. But this is something new for the European Union. It's muscle movements, as you said, it was an instrument of peace, and really for a long time defense didn't really fall, and security didn't fall under the Union itself. It was more sovereign states, it was more NATO. Recently you addressed Johns Hopkins University in D.C. saying, quote, Europe is ready to play our part in guaranteeing peace and stability in Ukraine because we know this means peace and stability in Europe, and that is a win-win for all. Is that a call for providing Ukraine with European security guarantees? And can Europe do that without the United States?
I'd like to say yes, unequivocally, but there is no doubt that no matter how much we step up, we will need help from our international allies. And I'll tell you why. And I'll give you some practical examples. So the invasion resulted in an influx of 7 million Ukrainians in the neighboring countries of the European Union. We would never have thought that that quick integration and easy absorption of that amount of people would happen so quickly, or was it even possible? Not only was it possible, that it happened quite smoothly. Integration in schools was smooth. Countries took on a responsibility that they never thought they could. And we stood up, and we were, I think it was around April, I visited Kiev on the 31st of March, so a few weeks after the invasion. And as soon as I arrived in a train station that bordered with Poland, on the other side of the tracks, I could see a whole train that was offloading Ukrainian refugees going to Czechia, the Czech Republic. And you could see that, I realized that there on the ground that solidarity is what we can do best. And that's when you really felt proud to be European. Help with equipment came later, came slower. It was new for us that you'd need to have licensing requirements months before products were moved from one country to another. They were begging us for help with equipment that the European Union has, also older style equipment that individual member states had. Reluctance, quite a lot of reluctance at first. Then something switched. Because we had a groundswell support for Ukraine and help for Ukraine, it became, because in all countries there are very strong Ukrainian communities, that heads of state and government realized that this actually helps if we show our solidarity with Ukraine also in concrete terms. So we saw quite a quick shift that also led to the European Parliament being the first institution to saying that Ukraine should join the European Union. That was then followed by a unanimous 27, also impossible if you think a few months before, saying yes, Ukraine should join the European Union together with Moldova. That meant that we saw our shortcomings. We had underestimated the way that we could absorb people, and that we also realized where we were not good enough. We have, as I said, increased by 21% our defense expenditure. Integration between member states and movement has become easier, not as easy as I would like it to be. But of course, the upcoming NATO summit will be a big reckoning as to where our depletions are, how we can be more agile, what kind of defense, if you will, union will be created, and this is in the context of NATO, outside NATO, and there are some countries that are neutral, but some of whom would always say, look, that doesn't mean we don't help in humanitarian peacekeeping. And this will be, I think, the next few weeks and months will be crucial in how much we can, let's say, argue for increase in expenditure, also against a sustained help for Ukraine. With regards to the negotiations, we have been of the firm opinion that nothing should be decided about Ukraine without Ukraine, and I think anybody coming from any country that would be at any point in its life vulnerable territorially would say the same, and that we would finally see a ceasefire that would lead to a lasting and durable peace. And perhaps, and I will conclude, is that what has also been, I think, bandied around, I've never heard this word bandied around so, let's say, flippantly, is the word peace. What do we mean by peace? Wouldn't peace be with liberty, with justice, with dignity, with territorial integrity? Without any of those four, it's not peace. But I have been in many, many, many meetings where that was conveniently forgotten. So I think we stood up, we woke up to a harsh reality, we matured as a continent, We had no choice. We did it because this is also a fight for our own security. This is in our neighborhood. For many countries, it's a border country. And this will also take us going forward into realizing that we need to do much more in order to stand on our 2 feet in the future.
Thank you so much for that excellent answer. The 2/3 of European Union citizens want the bloc to play a greater role in protecting them. So that's a very good thing. But as I said before, it is a new role for the European Union, so this is really a two-part question. One of them is, what does the EU need to change in its design to take this on? What does the EU look like as a security actor in practice? And then how should that work alongside NATO? The second part of this, it's clear we're not producing enough weaponry on both sides of the Atlantic. You look at Ukraine, this year they're going to produce 4 million drones, maybe 3.5, 4 million drones from really nothing. It's really remarkable what the Ukrainians have been able to pull off under the threat of their very existence. But we haven't been on the same war footing ourselves. So one part of this question is, what does the EU look like as a security actor? The other part of this is are you focused on building a transatlantic defense industrial base, or is it a European defense industrial base? I mean, if you're going to put 800 billion euros new into defense, your politicians, you're going to have to create jobs in Europe, you're going to have to spend in Europe. Will that be at the expense of spending in the United States on defense? How does one do this? Because it's one thing coming up with the money, but the other thing having the production to buy usefully with that money, and then how does this work together transatlantically? So I'm sorry, those are two quite related but complex questions. What does the EU look like as a security actor? And then as one goes into this field, how much of the money goes to buying European production, and how much is transatlantic, and should those rules be set up, how those rules should be set up as one goes forward?
So I'll start with the second part. In terms of the way this, in the next couple of weeks, there will be an agreement between governments on this SAFE program, as it's called. There is a push for joint projects, in other words, countries coming together in order to invest in security and also production. It takes very long. So I'll give you one example. To build a military-grade helicopter, it takes 2 years, for example, one. And there is division between countries as to whether these should be solely European. The United Kingdom has been, also wanting to be part of this agreement. There are other countries who would say we cannot do this without the United States. Both in terms of production, in terms of historical contracts, in terms of military dependence, etc. And it also there is difference between what member states need and what they will be considered as a part of security infrastructure. So, Maria, you're from Finland, icebreakers, for example, in Finland are considered to be part of security infrastructure. That's where that country is the best at producing. Why would you prevent, I would say, that country from exporting to countries like this one, which would need them? Just give you an example. So I think there will be quite a lot of agility, but there will be, let's say, a quite strong push to make sure that money is also spent in joint projects, which brings member states together, construction of railways, reconstruction of movement from inland to the sea. There are countries, I was in Romania yesterday, and the discussion there is how to also revitalize countries, parts of the rural areas that are severely deindustrialized, perhaps into places where production is seen, and made, just like Ukraine showed that you can do that quickly without being bogged down as we have been bogged down by regulation and licensing. So that's something that we have managed. I remember we had talks after talks with the Ukrainians, which showed a huge amount of frustration at the inability and the slowness. What the design? So there are discussions, of course, as to whether making the voting structure in foreign security and defense easier by removing the veto right of countries. That is a discussion that pops up every so often, has popped up quite recently again. I believe that the political will that we have found, so we've managed to find the will to do things at unanimity, where each member state, all of them, has said yes to 17 packages of sanctions, for example, on Russia. Also something I would have thought impossible a few years ago, because I remember being for a long time in negotiations that resulted in very little success with Libya, for example, in the past rounds of negotiations of sanctions. And there what we have also seen is great alignment until a few months ago with the United States in terms of how you manage to make sure that a country that has committed an act of war, what are the repercussions of that act and how can you align as an international community to push back. That's something we keep, let's say, harping on also, because when you mentioned security guarantees before, I mean, the member states around Ukraine will be able to offer security guarantees after the war. I mean, this is something that can be done. When we talk about NATO, and this is the big discussion, and there will be, of course, questions as to whether the money that is being allocated through the European Union will go essentially for member states to match their NATO targets. So that is a big, also ideological discussion that is taking place in Europe, and will grow. I see it also in terms of different different ideological fronts as to where that money should go and for what. That is not
still to be determined.
That is not a new argument you will always have. But there is a sense of urgency. What we've done in the Parliament, and we've said since 2015 that we should have a defence union. Governments will be like, no, we're not doing this at European level, we're going to do it at member states. No one says that anymore. If something happens in the Mediterranean Sea, you no longer have a situation where if you come from the eastern part of Europe, you feel that's far away. That has gone. Before that would happen, so what would happen in Portugal would not be considered to affect Greece. But now that is no longer also in the way we do politics, in the way we act from a legislative point of view, is completely different to when, for example, I joined the European Parliament 11 years ago. We've also completely turned around the speed with which we take decisions. We see it also here when you compare to previous mandates in terms of how you can really go fast when you have the political will. And avoid let's say, what we used to hide behind legislative obstacles or bureaucratic or administrative obstacles. We managed to push through a defense procurement bill in 6 weeks. Last mandate, we adopted legislation on ammunition production in 8 weeks. So things that would take years before, now take weeks. And we've essentially cut down on all the timings that we used to depend on and just say, now we go. Because when our citizens voted for us last June, they gave us very clear requests across the European Union. If you think, you mentioned the 2/3 on security, for many countries that's the number one concern. It wasn't like that 5 years ago. Last election we ran. The next essential question will be housing. So there is a big demand, frustration against European governments across the board for not doing enough to make sure that young people do not feel that they're excluded from the property ladder. And the third is having a dignified work, a job. And these are not big asks from governments, but for many years governments did not respond to that. And that's the big wake-up call now we've had since then. And in that would be a defense architecture as well, which means that we're more interoperable. We will not compete with NATO, that is not the aim, but we also have a solidarity clause that when a member state is targeted, then other countries need to defend. How that will work, we'll see.
Yeah, it's a learning process at a time of war. One more question from me, and then I want to take a couple from the audience. China. On the one hand, huge market, huge opportunity for European business, for U.S. business, for everybody. On the other hand, we all know the issues and the challenges from China as well. at a time when you might be in a trade conflict with the United States. Some are saying that will push Europe more into the hands of trade with China. How do you look overall at the relationship? Do you worry about China's presence on the continent? How does the EU address strategic dependencies, Chinese goods, materials, infrastructure? And what's the impact of the Trump administration's tariff policies on the EU's relationship with China?
I think one of the things that has become even more clear over the past months, recent months, is it's not only Europe's dependence on critical raw materials or certain parts of products in the market on China, but also the United States. Are we too late in recognizing that? Is there an economic reality in terms of economies of scale, in terms of dumping of products, in terms of human rights protection that we should be incredibly wary of? Yes. What I don't want is the European Union not to have the possibility to continue to produce. I'll give you one example. There is practically no solar panel in the European Union that is produced domestically. It is imported from China. We give subsidies in order for you to diversify your energy mix on your house. So we call that a green policy. But these are solar panels that are built with the dirtiest fuels on the planet. So it gives you a sort of an idea as to where we are. Will we be able to reverse that particular production? Some attempts are being made. Try to re-divert the chain of the supply chain, perhaps. But we have to be realistic. Another question is electrical vehicles, where we see that there is a huge, now increasing Chinese presence in Europe, particularly, where we have seen the need also to allow for more flexibility with European car manufacturers in order for them to be allowed to grow inside the market with the right subsidies or cost, let's say, benefits for those who buy them, because otherwise we would be benefiting a country that is simply dumping cheaper products in the market. At the end of the day, however, those cheaper products are the only products that lower income families can afford. There is an agriculture question. This will be something that I will feature quite a lot in the tariff negotiations. We depend quite heavily on some agriculture products from the US, this state, for example, soy, etc. Where would we turn to? Who would we then start to import from? Our markets need products that come from outside. So I would not like to be forced, to look away from this continent. And that's where we need to, I think, be pragmatic and honest as to how much. And my office has been flooded the past weeks and months with the representatives of these companies who produce in the US and who are heavily, heavily dependent on the EU that are telling us, please, we need to continue to make trade with you. I was like, well, me too, but this is a reality that we're going to face. But for sure, what I think, and I continue to be quite concerned about this, and two reasons, from a data mining perspective, and two, from a lower end products that are essentially flooding our markets, and that we would need to also, start to see, and see how to protect our markets from being completely either priced out or wiped out in terms of production. That's my biggest concern.
Okay, clear answer to a very complicated set of questions, so thank you so much. Let me turn to the audience. Please, right here in the front row. And a microphone will be run to you so everyone can pick this up. We'll see which of the two people get to you first.
Hi, President Metsola. Thank you for being here. My name is Tony Bishop. I was actually a Schumann trainee in the European Parliament, and I also happen to be from Dayton, Ohio. So it's really cool to see the EP in my hometown. So my question is actually kind of on that. It's about exchange programs. It's a little bit of a selfish question, if I'm being honest. I think we need more EP interns from the state of Ohio and from the Midwest. So could you please advertise internships in all of the Ohio schools and bring back, though, also the Brussels portion of the U.S. internship, because it's extremely developmentally friendly and advantageous, I would say, for folks like myself. So that's kind of my spiel there. But if you could bring that program back, that'd be great.
Go ahead.
I love that question.
Yeah.
I've always had U.S. interns in my office ever since. And one of them, who comes from Mobile, Alabama, is now permanently employed with me. And it's pretty amazing. So we had, pre-COVID, this was, and you were, I don't know, when did you do a traineeship?
2019.
Right, yeah, just before COVID. So pre-COVID, we had a very flourishing program with certain universities, certain paths. I didn't know. We also had with Ohio, so point taken about advertising here. We're proud of our traineeship. We consider it to be, we train thousands of young people every year. And that helps whether you go into public service or anything you do want to do. And I make it a point to meet with the trainees whenever they come. So every 6 months I meet with thousands of them, where we just sort of exchange like what can you do and how. And I see that most of them actually would like to stay on in Brussels when it's done, and Brussels rains a lot, but they like it. I also have a deal. Yeah, that's true. I have a deal with Furman in South Carolina, where I have had over the years a possibility to go and train, because they have one of the few European law and studies departments in South Carolina. It's quite amazing, in Greenville. And we've done this because it's myself and a president of Finland, who's Alexander Stubb, was also a student there, so we have a deal with them. And I'm also in talks with Mike Johnson, who's my counterpart, Speaker of Congress, because I would like to have a more permanent exchange of trainees between Congress and the European Parliament. We are equivalent in the way we train. And having an experience in the office of a congressman or a member of the European Parliament is, as I've heard, you can't get it anywhere else. You don't have that you run from one committee to another, you go down to vote, you have, the next door someone who has completely different ideology, comes from a different background to you, but everybody is in a way in the same sort of messy situation of chaos. And it's just an amazing thing to do. So point taken about Ohio. I'll try to, build up our presence in the States.
A few other states would like to get into line.
Yeah. I'm going to get everyone coming to me now going, that's only Ohio.
Let me take these last two questions. I see three.
We've got 5 minutes left. We can collect them.
Okay, let's take these three short questions, and then we'll get short answers, and I think we'll be able to move through. So 1, 2, and 3. So please, I think it's Ed Joseph through the dark here that I can see. But if you could introduce yourself and pose your question.
Thank you very much, Fred. Wonderful conversation. Edward Joseph from Johns Hopkins SAIS, and President Metsola, we were honored to host you there. If you permit me, a slightly more challenging question than Tony's. We're here in Dayton, in this very nice town, because of U.S. diplomatic leadership to solve and end a terrible war in Europe some 30 years ago. Now, President Metsola, the situation in the Balkans remains very difficult, and Russia and China are still have their malign influence in that region. And my question is, how can the European Union show its independence and no longer needing the United States in that region when, for example, a European Union candidate country is warned by Brussels, the leader of that country is warned, do not go to Moscow and do not attend this event in Moscow. And then that leader goes to Moscow. And the very next week, a senior European Union official meets with that individual. I know you speak for the Parliament, not the Commission, and not the Council, but I appreciate your views on that. Thank you so much.
And so I'll take 3. And
go ahead,
questions, please. I'm sorry, I've got these 3 here, but here and here. Yeah. Okay.
Mrs. Metsola, so you were saying that...
Could you introduce yourself?
I'm Matthew Drummond. I go to high school here. So I was...
Great to have you here.
So you were saying for like a peace that had no territorial concessions and maintaining liberty. So what would be the plan in Ukraine, considering they've been in deadlock territorially for 3 years, to actually end a war and follow through on those, considering there's been no territorial movement? And how would you convince Russia to agree to a peace there?
Good question. And I think you were first up with your question, so I really apologize to other people we didn't get to, but if you could push the microphone here. Thank you.
Carl Tykrup from Canada, and my question is on the issue of the creation of a European Union army. I know that's a topic that's popped up with Spain, and there's a long history of the concept going back to 1952 with the fact that Europe is looking to integrate its defense industry. Is that a realistic option?
And I'm going to thank you so much.
Yes.
I'm going to pile on to those three. You have 4 sons, right? I did my research correctly, and you talked about your son going into the military. As you look at Europe, what gives you the most hope for their future? What gives you the most concern?
All right, thanks for that. Okay, so the Western Balkans. You know, I have been in so many summits, and in fact, I try to balance every visit like I'm doing here, not just, in the like normal photo opportunities and flags, because, I'm sort of a pragmatic politician rather than one that likes photo ops. So I've been in so many of those summits where the frustration was so real, where you'd have country after country expressing that frustration that they've been in this situation for a decade, some of them more, where a lot of pomp and promises are made in Brussels, with chapters being opened and clusters starting to be negotiated. And then, as happened with Romania and Bulgaria, you join the European Union and it takes you 11 years to join the Schengen area, which gives you freedom of movement. So we've realized, in my generation, my country joined the European Union 21 years ago with Poland, Hungary, and Central and Eastern Europe and Cyprus, is an understanding that if the European Union does not step up in its efforts to match the ambition of each and every country in the Western Balkans, then others will step in. And this is real. Leaders of those countries, and you saw with the elections in Albania a couple of weeks ago, where still the campaign was based on a promise to join the European Union. There are 12 countries in this situation where campaigns and elections are won and lost on the basis of a hope that the European Union is an aspiration for mostly the young generation in those countries to join. So it is not easy. The relationship between all those countries is complicated. That's putting it mildly. You need to understand the region before talking. It's very difficult. Sometimes you see that people who visit or address are not, experts and really need to be careful. And there is also an understanding that for some of them, they need to play different sides. And it's not only countries in the Western Balkans, but also countries of the European Union. And I think it is also because of a lack of concrete and serious expression of commitment by the EU. I think we should look at us. These are small countries who can easily integrate. They have to do reforms. This is merit-based. If you don't play the game, you will not be let in. But if you do, don't shut the door. And I think that's what our message has to come from this weekend, because you meet the leaders of all those countries and they look and you say, look, we need the European Union. Our young people would like to join. How much time are you going to take playing with us? And I think that is also a backdrop against the incident you mentioned and the meetings that took place after that. I think we could do better. In terms of territory. The reason why I said no, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine is because it's not up to us to decide where the territory of Ukraine starts and finishes. It's the Ukrainians who will decide as to which part of that land of theirs has to be fought for. And I say this because the easiest, as we have seen with history, is that you'd have other countries that redraw maps. Populations whose maps have been redrawn never recover. Generation after generation after generation, sometimes centuries after. So I think it would be a historical mistake if we try to redraw any map without Ukraine around the table. What would it take for Russia? Russia just needs to get out of Ukraine. This is a ceasefire is not where you bomb all night and have political propagandist rhetoric in the morning, because that's what's happening at the moment. And that's pretty sad to see. Prisoners, there was a big prisoner exchange that is currently ongoing, that was negotiated in Turkey last week. Good, great step. We need to go further. So I think also on this, the next weeks will be crucial. I think the Ukrainians have defied all expectations in terms of their strength and resilience. I have visited the country, I've met prisoners that have been exchanged, I've met children that had been taken and have been returned. Scars will remain with them forever. And that's really something that I think our generation, as I said before, we have not known war. This will affect all of us. And we should never forget. Never. EU army. This is not a new discussion, as you said, decades long. We tend to really spend decades. Soon it will be a century. I don't think that the question is about an EU army. It's more integration. We have huge differences between countries, huge traditions, different, you have some countries that have overcome military regimes for whom this is very sensitive. You have other countries that have never, let's say, lost their capacity, but some countries that have lost it completely. So there is now finally a serious discussion about, that capacity being more integrated and actually being more agile. We have perhaps sort of similar to the model created, and this was legislation I worked on and I was extremely proud of it, is our border agency, so the external border, for which there is an agreement that 30,000 border guards would be deployed across wherever it's needed. So whether it is on the Finnish-Russian border, on the Polish-Belarus border, on the Greek-Turkish border, Spain, Ceuta Melilla border, etc., and all member states pool or send to that. Does it work perfectly? No. Are we very far away from deployment capacity? Yes. However, I have met some of their units in Lithuania, in Poland, and they are fantastic. And it's nice to see, standing next to each other, depending on the flag, that they would come. One comes from Poland, one comes from Italy, one comes from Hungary, etc. I even visited the EU border assistance mission, which is on the corner between the Gaza Strip and Rafah in Egypt. And there you have a similar operation of evacuation of the sickest and the ones that need help. Hope and concern. So I start with the concern. I think concern is that we have, for my children, so my eldest is 18, my youngest is 8, my biggest concern is mental health. So it's completely different to everything we've discussed now. But since the pandemic, we have seen an enormous increase in mental health concerns among our young. Massive. It's still a stigma to talk about it, but you have 17, 18, 19-year-olds who have not recovered from staying home for a year and a half or two.
It's true.
Isolationism is big. Complete dependence on technology instead of what I used to do when I was young. is extremely concerning, extremely. And whereas here the discussion is much more advanced in terms of age verification mechanisms, etc., we're still not there, but we're working with Meta and the social platforms in order to try to integrate some sort of understanding that our young are the most vulnerable. So that's a concern that I have as a mother. My hope is that they grow up in a Europe that is as beautiful as I grew up in, not with nostalgia, but that is the place where we consider, like is one of the best places on earth to grow up, and build a family, build a company, and just be part of an integrated world. That's the best thing about living in a place where you can vote, you can choose your leaders, you can do what you want, you can live how you want, and just know that you can move wherever with just education. You don't need much. You just need education where you are trained to be open-minded and be tolerant. That's a hope for me that I think we can really deliver if we do our job right.
Thank you for that.